Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ELGL Efficiency webinar. Each month, ELGL highlights a new tool or approach that will make your life easier and your work more efficient. My name is Kirsten Wyatt, and I'm the Executive Director of ELGL, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's session. ELGL is a Big Tent local government organization. We work to connect, communicate, and educate our members on a variety of local government topics, and today is no exception as we explore online citizen engagement. Today, I'm excited to introduce to you Matt Crozier from Bang the Table as our guest speaker. And today's webinar has one of my favorite webinar titles that we've hosted to date, Managing Community Outrage Through Online Tools. Before we begin, I want to let you know that your microphones and conference phones are muted, and this makes the webinar enjoyable and efficient for everyone. And after the presentation has finished, we will open up for questions, and these may be submitted using the chat box on the left-hand side of your screen. I'd also like to thank Strategic Government Resources for their partnership, which has given us the ability to record our webinars so you can watch them later and share them with your colleagues. And we'll be live tweeting today's webinar. You can follow along with the hashtag ELGLTech and be sure to use the Twitter handles for today's participants, which I've pasted in the sidebar to the left. I also want to give a big shout out to Bang the Table for being an important sponsor of both ELGL 17 in Detroit in May and also the ELGL pop-up conferences in Portland, Charlotte, Kansas City, and Dallas in September. We couldn't host these important events without the support of Bang the Table. And so with that, I want to hand it over to Matt for today's presentation.
Okay, couldn't somebody type into the chat bar if you can hear me now? Apparently you can. Sorry about that. All the best things start with a false start. So my apologies. I hope everybody's still there. We'll get into this. So as I was introduced, Matthew Crozier from Bang the Table. What I wanted to do today was rather than start and take you through a kind of product demonstration, I thought it'd be much more interesting to talk about why doing online engagement is useful and how we get around outrage. What I come across a lot when I go out and talk to local government about engaging online is there's a lot of enthusiasm about connecting more closely with the community, but there's some fear about what happens when we're in these outrage situations. Will it just amplify things? Will it make things worse? Will we lose control? So I thought it might be kind of good to do a webinar that's more about practice and how actually you can use online tools to make make your engagement practice safer, rather than just going through a demo. If any of you would prefer to have a kind of product demo type thing, that's cool. Bear with us. You'll see a little bit about Engagement HQ, our software, as you go. And just let us know, and we can organize a demo anytime. That's really easy to do. Before I get into it, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about us. Bang the Table was founded close to 10 years ago in Australia. We're a company on a mission to connect people with the decisions that affect their lives. We have about 250 clients worldwide. I'm talking to you from our office in Boulder, Colorado, but we also have offices in Canada, India, Australia, and the UK. And the practice that I'm going to talk to you about today is built from doing a lot of engagement with our clients. We did over 3,000 projects last year, and we learn all the time from the stuff that you guys do. So I'm going to plow on. I can't actually see the chat box while I do this. So if any of you have got any particular questions, please hold them for the end, and we'll leave plenty of time to deal with them. So when dealing with community outrage, the first thing I'd like to talk about is it really community outrage? We do see issues where broad cross sections of the community feel really passionately about them, and that's where I'd characterize outrage. But we also see small groups within our community who perhaps are very good at feigning community outrage. I've worked with a lot of cities who don't often see anybody in their public gallery, and then 10 people turn up waving signboards and things like that, and cheering and booing and all the rest of it, and the councillors are sort of back on their heels saying, wow, the community must be really angry. But the real question here is it just 10 angry people who are very good at amplifying their voice, or is the broader community actually outraged? And online engagement can really help you here. We all know that we're far more likely to hear from the people who are angry about something than the people who are ambivalent. But if you do a well-publicized online engagement, you can start to measure the ambivalence in the community. We measure in our software, we measure in cohorts, aware, informed, and engaged. And the engaged cohort is the real indicator of community outrage. Now, if you've got a project and you're seeing a very high informed cohort, so you've say you're doing a housing strategy and you've put out, you've publicized it well, and 2,000 people have come and had a good look at it, and 20 people are really angry and have left lots of comments, giving you lots of feedback. Now, being able to measure the 2,000 who are ambivalent is really important context. It's quite normal whenever you change anything to find that you've got, a dozen or so people who really disagree with you quite vehemently. They're often the same people issue to issue. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. But what's really important is to be able to provide context around that. And in the online space, we can do that in a way you can't do it in a face-to-face meeting. One of the problems I used to run into in face-to-face meetings was the people there would always claim to represent the broader community, but actually they very rarely actually did. And we can help you to look for this. Now, I'm going to give you an example to try and illustrate this. In our very early days in Australia, about 10 years ago, we did some work with a city called Hornsby. And the city of Hornsby was trying to redevelop a quarry. It was an old defunct quarry, and they were keen to redevelop the area. And they had the 10 people, I think it was 12 actually, but they had a handful of people who were coming to meetings and really kind of making this an issue that looked like outrage. They were very good at amplifying through local media, and so for the councillors, they were, and they came to us and said, this feels like our community's really angry. Can you help us to interpret this? So they did an online engagement, and from memory, they used a discussion forum. I think back then that was the only tool we have. We have a few more now, and I'll talk about them later. And they went to the community and they let the community know this was an opportunity to come and have your say. And they got quite a large number of visitors, and they got about 12 to 14 people commenting in the forum. There were the 12 people who were turning up to the council meetings, and they were predictably angry and left a number of comments each. And a couple of other people who came in and said, look, please just get on with developing the site. We want to reduce the taxes we pay locally, and we'd like to see the site developed. But what the city was really able to tell from this was, yes, they had a deeply concerned subset of the community And those people were concerned, and their concerns shouldn't be diminished by this, but that the broader community was aware of the issue and wasn't concerned enough to want to comment. And I think that's the important point. You can't say somebody that comes and looks and goes away again is supportive of a proposal or a project or has a particular position, but you can say they didn't care enough to want to comment, and that's important. And I pick on Hornsby particularly here, not just because they were one of the first to take us through this process, but also because they did other projects later where they did have thousands of comments, where the community really was outraged, and so they actually were able to demonstrate within their own community, not just take my word for it, that when there's outrage, you do get a very high engagement rate, lots and lots of feedback. And when there's not really outrage, you're going to see, a high visitorship and a little bit lower level of feedback. And so online straight away can help you determine, is this really outrage or not? The next thing, of course, you want to understand the anger. What is the outrage about? And we came across another city sometime later, and I won't name them because it was a particularly difficult experience, but they went and talked to the community about building a new arts centre, not normally a controversial issue, and they got a massive reaction. I seem to recall it was, they're only a small city, and, we were close to 1,000 comments, and people were just, furious. And what was happening here, the Arts Centre wasn't the issue at all. This was the very first time that community had a chance to have their say. And they were furious about a number of things, not least the fact that they felt the city invested too much in the city centre and not enough in the rural hinterland. And so in this case, it was a culmination of things. The anger that was coming through wasn't about the arts centre. People didn't really care, I don't think, whether there was an arts centre or not. What they cared about was that they felt money was being directed to the wrong place and they were being ignored. So one way to get to the heart of whether it is this issue or a culmination of things, is to ask people for their stories. Storytelling in the online space can be an incredibly powerful way of understanding what sits behind the positions people are taking. So if you run a discussion forum, people typically will jump straight into a position and start arguing with each other. Whereas if you ask for stories, you get to understand why people are taking those positions. We've done it a few times. We stumbled into storytelling. We were working with the Australian government on a national disability insurance scheme, and we were seeing very fractious discussion forums, quite a lot of arguments, and people taking very intransigent positions. People wouldn't budge at all on what they were asking for. So we went and asked them, disabled people and their carers, for their stories to try and understand why they were taking such strong positions. And what we found was, through 297 stories from disabled people and their carers, that what they were facing was so appalling and so difficult that there was in their minds no room for compromise, because this was literally a life and death issue for them. And the stories were really useful there for our clients in understanding, okay, having a debate about the niceties of the policy isn't the thing to do here. We actually need to understand people's needs better. Another place where we've used stories to some success, or one of our clients has, more to the point, and I've put on the slide here a URL, sorry it's a bit of a long URL, to a blog about the project, in case anyone wants to follow up afterwards and have a look. But this was a project called Protecting the Snowies. The Snowy Mountains is an iconic region of Australia, famous for its wild horses. But the wild horses are an introduced species and cause a lot of environmental damage. And the preferred and apparently more humane way to control the horses is by shooting them from helicopters, which naturally causes an enormous amount of community consternation. So our clients, in this case, who were looking to avoid outrage, I suppose, started their engagement by asking people to tell their stories, and hopefully you can see some of these now, tell their stories about their experience with the wild horses or their experience with the environment. And we got a lot of feedback coming in. I think most of the ones on this particular page are about loving the horses, but there are a number on the site that are also about the impact on the environment. And what we found was that this did a couple of things. Firstly, it allowed people to understand the two sides of the argument, and it led to a really respectful discussion where we were expecting high octane outrage. What we got was a lot of understanding. And this, I'm just going to, actually, this is worth just dwelling on for a moment. I'm just going to click through to the discussion forum, because the next stage after stories was they ran a discussion forum, and nearly all of the discussion items, sorry, it'll take a while to load, nearly all the discussion items, and there were hundreds and hundreds of comments across many discussion threads here, and nearly all of them were prefaced with a video of a person talking, a person telling their story and explaining why their point of view was one way or another. And it led to an enormously respectful discussion instead of outrage, because people understood why the horse lovers were passionate and why the environmentalists were passionate. What we ended up with was a respectful discussion that our moderators had to intervene very little in. It worked very well. And that, of course, was all about not only our clients understanding the outrage, but also the community being able to understand why people felt views in different directions. And, you know, when you put these things alongside face-to-face engagement processes, you can really sort of get to the heart of people's anger and start working on and diffusing that anger before it overwhelms. You know, I used to do face-to-face meetings, and I fronted up in my time to a few angry ones. And generally, having 200 people in the room who are all furious is no more useful than having 5 people in the room who are not representative. Because when people arrive furious, they're there determined to say their piece, and all you get is a lot of shouting, noise, and anger, and a very frustrating process. So these sorts of online tools used at the front end of a process to help everybody understand where everybody's at can be incredibly valuable. And I'd just like to say also, you should spend some time explaining why. Now, this does verge on stating the obvious, but you know, often you don't see this in a government context. You know, government organizations, particularly local government organizations, don't upset people for fun. There's always a reason, but quite often you see organizations neglecting to clearly explain the reason. The reasons might be hidden in a 200-page PDF document or something like that, but it's actually really easy to provide sort of multimedia, easy to digest format media to explain to people why you're doing this. And that in itself can go a long way to diffusing outrage. So if I just get rid of that message, if I just show you a quick example. So this is the city of Niagara Falls on the Canadian side of the falls. They just launched this engagement site very recently, and I kind of like the look of it, so I figured I'd use it to illustrate. You can see they're talking about a whole number of issues. I'm just going to click on one of them. This is about off-leash dog park, and what I just wanted to show you here is that there's a good explanation of the project. There are illustrations. There's a video of somebody talking about the project and explaining it. And so anybody who was outraged about this particular proposition, and I have to say that if you really want to see community outrage, talk about taking away dog owners' facilities, and you'll really see people fire up. But anybody coming here has plenty of really easy to digest ways to understand why this is an issue, why the city are choosing to deal with this issue. And hopefully for some people that will be enough to set their minds at rest as they go through the process. Now, letting them vent, I guess this is a little controversial, but I think it's something that you should always consider, and it's something that online engagement lets you do. When I talked earlier about those public meetings where 200 people turn up and they're all angry and you really don't get anything done, online engagement can be used together with that to actually allow people to vent before they get in the room. So you can quite deliberately ask people really open questions. You know, normally I advocate asking positive questions, and putting people in a position of solving a problem, so that you kind of calm the trolls, and you always put people in a position of answering a question and solving a problem so that things are positively channeled. But I have seen practitioners, consultancies who've used our software for really controversial issues, and they've quite deliberately asked open questions. What do you think of this? You know, what are your ideas? Just stuff that might lead to getting a good slap. And they put those out there, and you get people venting, and then you run your face-to-face events, and then you bring people in the room and try and fix the problem. And because they've had that opportunity to vent online, when they get in the room, they're more ready to actually start solving and working on the problem. And so you get rid of that. If you've ever done one of those sessions that lasts half a day and you spend the first 3 hours just being shouted at by people, and you're desperately trying to get them into a situation where they can break into groups and be constructive, you can actually save yourself that few hours of pain by using online at the front of the process. Now, an example of this, we worked some time ago with a consultancy called Straight Talk. We were working with, and I apologize, it's another Australian example. I'll have some more local ones later. But we were working with the city of Warringah. They were looking to move a football stadium. And I'm sure everyone everywhere in the world understands the passion if your favourite football club's being evicted from its stadium. So it was a big issue, and the consultants set up a discussion forum that got 700 and something comments from people who were very angry. And then they did a week of face-to-face meetings. They used a World Cafe format, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, breaks people out into tables to solve different problems. And they had a really constructive process. And at the tail end of it, they ran another discussion forum. And the second discussion forum, sorry, I got a bit thrown by a phone call. The second discussion forum had about 70 comments, and it was the same people. We could see it was the same people making the comments, but those people were much more calm. Most of them, instead of being angry as they were at the beginning, were now saying that they understood the process. They still had different views on it, but their understanding was much greater and their outrage was much less. So, it proved to be a very valuable process. Now, I don't know of many cities who are brave enough to invite and bring on venting before a face-to-face process, but I would urge you to consider it if you are, if you've got a major project that people that are very angry about. Allowing people to do that online is much less painful than having them do it in the room. Okay, so next up is, don't let them go to social media for answers. And I feel very passionately about this. And particularly in the US today, we can see this going on. People are getting their news from different sources. They're learning things from different places on social media. And most people, for most people, not everybody, but for most people, social media is just an echo chamber. People are only following people who agree with them. And they're not following many people who don't. And I've heard stories since the presidential election here of families who no longer follow each other on Facebook and things like that because they don't share the same views. And people have a very low tolerance at the moment. In fact, I must admit, I caught myself unfollowing someone on Twitter because I didn't agree with them the other week and I had to stop myself. People are existing in echo chambers and they're not hearing opposing views. And it's quite often that we see people who come into a process and they'll say something like, it's so simple. Why can't you idiots get it? And exposing that person to somebody who also thinks you're idiots, but thinks the simple solution is something different can be really valuable. So I believe very strongly that social media magnifies and amplifies outrage. It's there for people to get each other stirred up and to get outraged. And I think it's becoming a real problem. And I know a lot of cities use social media very successfully, and I certainly wouldn't advocate not using social media, but I do think you need to recognize that what your community are doing on social media isn't often very fact-based. It's more value-based. And so I think you need a calm and fact-based space where you can answer questions and explain the issue, explain why, understand where people are at, measure what's really going on, and help people understand other people's views. And I just want to show you here, this is the site for Vancouver Airport. They're looking at a major expansion, and this has been a long-term site. There's a big master planning process going on, and I'm not close to the process, and I don't know the extent of community outrage here, but I've picked this because these guys, since day one of the project, have had a question and answer tool open where people can come in and ask the project team questions. And you can see here, if I just scroll through, there have been a lot of questions asked over the years. There are a number of pages of these, and this creates a searchable and very transparent record that they've been responding to the community. But more importantly, it means that the community are coming to them to ask questions. They're not going to Facebook or Twitter. They're not asking the crowd. They're asking the organization who can actually explain and offer calm and dispassionate advice. And I think that's, just increasingly important in what we do. Okay, I think you've got to make room for other voices. Now, I mentioned earlier, you're more likely to hear from opposition than supporters. People are more motivated by hate than love, and that's a sad truth in what we do. But so it means that what we should be trying to do with our online engagement particularly is create a space where you can hear from all voices. The first thing is turning up to your meeting is a high barrier to participation. And people won't do that. They're too busy, and they'll come if they're angry or scared, but they won't often come because they're ambivalent or comfortable or supportive. And so creating a space online where it's really easy to come and learn, where you're measuring that people are coming and being informed, because as I mentioned earlier, that gives you context for the people who do speak, but where it's really easy to contribute becomes really important. And I'd just like to briefly mention using anonymity to protect non-conforming opinions. There's a school of thought, and we could do a whole webinar on this one, but there is a school of thought out there that says that anonymity leads to people behaving badly online. And I'm here to say it's not the case. We've had millions of contributions to our sites. We do moderate our sites. We have human moderators 24/7 looking after what goes on. But we don't remove more than about 1% of comments. People behave pretty well. The importance of anonymity, and on our sites, people are anonymous to one another, but we kind of verify who they are so you can tell who you're talking to. But that anonymity allows people to speak against the general perception of the community. So if you live in a road full of people who are protesting the redevelopment of the empty land out the back, as was my case in Hornsby earlier, and you happen to think it should be redeveloped, you should be free to speak up and give voice to that opinion without being berated by your neighbors or it affecting relationships. Similarly, if you happen to work for a supplier of an organization who is advocating a project and you oppose the project, you need that kind of pseudo-anonymity of being recognized only by a screen name in order to be able to safely contribute to the discussion. So I think making room for people with divergent voices to be able to speak is a really important part of managing that outrage, because if you never hear from those divergent voices, you're right back in the echo chamber where you started. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about which online tools you might use. So our platform, Engagement HQ, has 8 tools in it, and I hope you'll forgive me that I've only listed those 8, but the 8 tools we have are pretty representative of what people use in online spaces. So I hope that by talking about these, it'll give you some ideas that go to whatever platform you're using. Incidentally, if you don't have a good selection of tools to use, you're using the wrong platform. When you do a face-to-face engagement process as an engagement practitioner, you don't do the same thing in every meeting. You plan your meeting and you plan the tools you're going to use based on the issue you're dealing with and the audience and all the rest of it. And it's the same in the online space. The days where just chucking out a survey for every project you've got passes as good engagement are long gone. And I think if you're doing that, then you're underserving your community, and frankly, you're not getting the right sort of feedback either. Now, the title of this slide is Hard to Troll a Map or an Ideas Board. Look, of our 8 tools, I'd suggest that 7 of them are very hard to troll. So if you've got an issue that you're a little bit afraid of, use these 7 tools, not the moderated discussion forums. I love moderated discussion. I love debate, and I love seeing the community debate. And nearly always it's constructive, and people love doing it as well. You see people in our discussion forums arranging towards the close of the project, arranging to meet in the pub to continue the discussion. People enjoy debate, but if you're nervous about it, and if you don't want to see outrage writ large on your online system, think about using some other tools. And I'm just going to show you a couple. I'll take you to an idea wall and a map just to help you visualize. This is a map. This is the city of Penticton in Canada. And you'll see here, they're going the positive question. They're asking people what they love about Penticton. But you get a sense here, these mapping tools, this, as it's called, Places, these mapping tools are very engaging. A lot of people contribute to them, and you've got to click the pin to see what other people are saying. It makes it very hard if you're outraged and wanting to troll something like this, because actually not everybody clicks all the pins. Most people just leave comments, and so you're really, as someone who is trying to hyperventilate and get everyone else anxious and outraged, this is very hard. It's very hard to use this. Similarly, an ideas board, this is a city that's using an ideas board for ideas about their budget, which is often quite a high octane issue and something that people get outraged about. And you'll see, again, there's 160 ideas here. You can look through them, you can vote on them, you can rank them, you can do all sorts of things. But again, if you're feeling negative and outraged, this is a very difficult place to do that. And again, the power of positive questioning. If you're asking people for their ideas about a process, they'll give you your ideas, but it's very hard to come up with an idea that expresses and generates outrage in the community. So these are ways that you can allow the community to feel that they're part of the process, that they're giving you feedback, that they're being listened to, without actually all the negative connotations of the outrage taking place. Similarly with surveys, polls, I've already talked about stories. We have a guest book that's sort of like a discussion forum with no replies. And so often our clients use it in places where they want people to express their views but not want to be able to challenge those views. All of these are ways that you can allow the community to express their views, where you can be measuring it, where you can be, drawing them into the process without that sort of outrage breaking out. And discussion forums, as I said, they are very valuable, but a lot of organizations don't, frankly, are a little bit fearful of using them in outrage situations. I would advocate considering them for venting and for exposing people to ideas, but if you're not up for that, use the other tools and you'll be just fine. A little bit of homespun philosophy, and it's, again, fairly obvious. Honesty and transparency do pay. And look, the more I say this often in these sorts of events, and time and again I see people falling into the same trap of they actually want to inform people about a project, but they feel that they ought to look like they're engaging. And I've actually been involved with projects where they're pretending to empower the community to make a decision, but they've actually no intention of doing so. The community always see through these. So, my little homilies here are, if you're informing them, that's okay. If you've already made a decision and you're going to inform the community, there's still room for online engagement. There's still the why stuff that I was talking about, getting the messages of why, building the understanding of the community. That's still important. So providing that sort of multimedia backdrop around helping them understand. And you can still answer their questions about the process and keep them informed and stop them going off to social media to hyperventilate there. Those are things you can still do if you're informing, and it's okay to inform the community. Sometimes the community like it. They think, oh, wow, these guys have made a decision. This is good. Don't pretend to empower them when you don't intend to do so, and don't ask for ideas when you want them to discuss your ideas. And this is another thing about tool selection. If you're putting out a draft proposal to the community, and usually when there's outrage, it's around a draft proposal. Not, normally if you start engaging right at the start of a project, which is often a good idea, when you haven't made your own mind up, the community aren't usually outraged at that point. It's usually that you've come up with a proposal that really scares them. But if you want them to discuss your idea, that's a place for surveys, for polls, maybe for discussion forums. It's not a place for ideas. I showed you ideas and the mapping tool as ways to, prevent being trolled in a high octane issue. But if you put up an ideas wall and say, we want your ideas about our draft, that's kind of weird, and that's likely to annoy people more than anything else. Put up a survey and have them reply to some questions or ask them to discuss it. That's far more appropriate. And my last slide, before I go to questions, although I do want to dwell on this for a moment, is that actually the best way to deal with outrage is to deal with it before it arises. Manage to ensure that your community feels empowered right from the outset, because an empowered community, a community that feels engaged with their city or with their county, is much less likely to become outraged than one that feels alienated from their city. We did some work with a market research company a while back, and they did a regression analysis that showed that although people in cities say that they judge their city's performance based on the services that they provide and the core services as well, they're very quick to say they don't want the peripheral services. In fact, revealed preference work shows that the more engaged they are, the more engaged they feel with the government, their local government, the more likely they are to be satisfied with the performance of that government. And I think this is a really important point. And online engagement has a role here because it allows you to engage consistently across a really broad cross-section of issues right across time. And not only to find that outrage really early in the process before it hurts you, but also to have people becoming used to the fact that they're being listened to in a space. So what we do with our engagement platform, as we build them for clients, and if I show you, this is the city of Aspen. I did promise to get more local, and you'll see they're engaging on a whole range of issues. So they get started and they engage on a range of issues, and some of these resonate with the community and get a bunch of feedback, and some of them don't get a bunch of feedback. But the community over time get used to this. They sign up to the site, and we had one of our US clients recently pass the point of having 10% of their community all signed up to the site already. So they sign up to the site, they go into the participant database, you understand who they are, you understand their demographics, you can sort by their demographics, and importantly, you can reach out to them to bring them back for future issues. And over time, and our clients, stay doing this for years. I don't think you should be thinking about this project by project. If you're a city, you should be thinking about engaging your community over a whole variety of issues over time. You build up a database that becomes a representative and a large database of your community, and you reach out to them to bring them back to talk about different projects. The chances that they're going to be completely outraged about a particular project diminish completely, because they can breathe, they can understand they're going to be talked to here, they're going to be listened to, and you will feedback. Now, you'll come up with outrage from time to time, but if the community feels empowered and feels listened to, they are going to be a lot more relaxed about what you're doing than if they're not. This is about building community capacity early, and doing regular engagement so that you can track you can spot the outrage coming, but also I don't know why I got an unmuted sign. I hope I haven't been muted throughout this. I'm going to carry on anyway. And I just wanted to show you another site. This is the city of Louisville in Colorado. They've just got started, and they've put up a project about historical stories to invite the community in. Just
hey, Matt, this is Kirsten.
Hi.
Hi there. Your screen just stopped sharing, and so I think that could have been the problem. And so if you wouldn't mind restarting that for us, we can hear you, but your screen just went away.
Sure thing. Okay. It's always nice to know there's someone there.
We're here.
I'll pause and restart the sharing. Tell me if that works.
Okay. Thanks, everyone, for your patience as well.
It wouldn't be a good webinar without a gremlin or two. Are you seeing the screen now?
Not quite yet.
Okay, look, I can continue anyway. I was just illustrating by showing the city of Louisville's site that has just launched with just a storytelling tool, asking people for the community's history. And what these guys are doing, without wishing to put words into their mouths, is they're making a start. They're getting the community used to the fact that they can engage online, so that when other projects come along in the future, there's already a presence, things are established, the community have got used to this. And, I hear a lot from organizations who say, gee, we'd like to try this online engagement, but we haven't got the right project yet. And what I'd like to say here is that if you actually want this to be useful when you're trying to manage for outrage and things like that, you really just need to get started. And you can talk to the community about something generic. You can have a bit of a placeholder there. Get them understanding that there's a site here. Get them understanding there's the opportunity to engage. Get them signing up so that they're ready to be contacted when a big issue comes up. And those big issues will be managed much better for you. And I'm guessing you can't see my last slide, which is somewhat annoying. Let me just try once more. Okay, I'm going to pause. I'm going to stop screen sharing and then resume. Hopefully you'll see my... Kristen is telling me that another presenter's sharing their screen.
I don't think anyone else is.
Oh, well, never mind. Perhaps we can distribute the slides afterwards. Would that be possible?
Absolutely. I'll send it out to everyone who's on, and then we'll also put it onto the summary page where we add the video and the Twitter transcript as well.
Cool. So look, the very last slide is simply a quote from the ELGL website. Timothy Martin from the city of Roanoke wrote a great article that you should all read. And there's a quote there, and I'm just going to quickly read it. It talks about engaging, and it says, "This shouldn't scare leaders. Negative comments shouldn't scare leaders. The ability to allow citizens to feel one with their government shouldn't scare leaders. Engaging citizens allows local government to foster collaborative conversations and create new innovative ways for citizens to get involved. Social media, its advancements, other digital platforms have provided Roanoke, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, the opportunity to communicate with citizens instead of to them. These days, that's what it's all about and what's expected." And that quote from that article, which you should all read on the blog, I think, sort of sums this up. The way we should be managing outrage is by having an engaged community already, and we shouldn't be afraid of the feedback that's coming. In fact, we should be welcoming, bringing the Hello? Oh, I'm back. That's good. Which bit did you all miss?
At the very, you were just finishing up Timothy Martin's quote.
Oh, okay. Well, I would urge you to all go and look for the quote. I just said really in conclusion that I think he's summed it up beautifully. And, government needs to be engaging online, not just to avoid outrage, but to build that capacity in the community so that when issues come up, you get them out of their echo chambers and back talking to you where they should be. I think that's enough of me. I'm hoping you've got lots of good questions.
So at this point, we have lots of time for questions, and as stated before, if you could please use that chat bar over to the left to ask your questions, and then I'll read them out loud just so our recording captures them. But I'll get us started with my first question, and that's if you could talk to us about if a community needs to have a certain demographic or age brackets represented to effectively use online tools. And what your research has shown about who is most interested in engaging online.
Yeah, sure. That's a good one. It often comes up, and we often come across people who say, "Oh, this would be terrible for engaging older people and great for engaging young people." And the truth is, sadly, not quite there. So what our clients tend to find, and I'm speaking fairly globally now, is that really young people, the under 21s, are very hard to engage. You've got to work really hard. There's some stuff on our blog about how to do it. Generally outreach, take the online software out on an iPad or something, talk to them, give them the URL, tell them to come back and find their comment and keep going in the conversation. But you've really got to work extra hard to get the really young people involved. And you've also got to make sure that what you're putting out there is relevant for them, because often that's where we go wrong. I think it's the same for everybody, really. If you're not talking about what they're interested in, they won't get involved. And we do get a lot of older people, generally, I think, because they're more engaged in the community. And these days, just about anybody under the age of 80 and a lot above that are all over social media and are quite used to using computers and things. But what our clients do report to us is that they hear it from a lot more of the people in the middle. So the people who are busy, I guess the professionals, the parents, and those sorts of people. We see when we're in a white collar area doing work, we tend to see a spike on our sites at about 3 p.m. I think that's the point where our blood sugar gets a bit low and we're looking for a diversion. And so you are able to tap into people who you maybe wouldn't normally speak to. So was that the full question? Were you just asking about who we'd speak to? So, sorry, one thing I would say is just related to that and database size. So, whatever online engagement software you're using, you should be able to interrogate and understand your database. You should be able to see who's in there, what their demographics are, what the gaps are, and you should be able to reach out to different sections of the community. So what we tend to do is work with our clients so that, we'd hope at the end of their first year, they'd have a good representative sample of the community in their database, but you keep building that up over time. and our participant management settings allow you to reach out to different segments. So you can create a group of under 25s and target them with an email. So if you're getting towards the end of a project and you look at who your feedback's come from and it's disproportionately one group or you're underrepresented in another, you can actually reach out within your database to the other groups and try and target them specifically. The other thing I think you should always think about is putting this next to your face-to-face engagement, and in your face-to-face engagement you can reach out to people as well. So I've worked with organizations, for instance, who found they were underrepresented by people from certain areas of the city or something, and so they'd push a barbecue into the local park or whatever, and feed people sausages while they talk to them in the about the issue. So there are, I think you should always mix your face-to-face and online, but what online can do very easily is tell you where you're under or overrepresented and allow you to address those gaps proactively.
Well, and I think anytime that you offer people sausages to talk about local government issues, that's probably always also a really good thing. So maybe that could be like a side business for banging people.
I think, well, we call sausages bangers where I'm from, so I guess that'd work. The other side of that, and I think it is worth emphasizing, is you should never view this as instead of face-to-face engagement. It's always better to sit down with someone and talk to them than be on the other end of a computer. And I think, and we've had some technical gremlins today that might testify for that, but, I think it is really important that this becomes about drawing more people into the room, about getting more people actively involved, not just keeping people at arm's length using technology. I think, that's something that thankfully isn't commonly done, but it's always worth emphasizing.
So Rebecca from Tacoma has a great question. She asks, once a project that has outraged the community is underway and cannot be legally stopped, how do we pacify the public and take our mea culpas and licks and move forward when they have lost all confidence in government?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I suppose it probably happens more than we'd like. Okay, so I think it's about, if people are already outraged, and I've worked on a few projects that fall into that category, the first thing to do is to demonstrate that you're listening. And to try and understand the outrage. So the stuff I was talking about storytelling, can be really valuable. If people are outraged because they don't think they're being heard or understood, then asking them to tell their stories, inviting them in to give their personal testimony, can be a really valuable way of diffusing the situation. At least people will then feel they're being listened to. Now, if your situation's even more scary than that and you don't feel you can even do that, then, I have had clients who've just launched websites to provide news, to explain, to do the why, and to give people updates, and to answer questions. And the question and answer, our question and answer tool is super safe because no questions appear without an answer. And when they appear, you get notified and you can choose to answer them publicly on the site so everyone can see, or privately by email. So it's a super safe situation, but does allow you to be doing that bare minimum. When you've already got outrage, what you really want to do, there'll be that group of people in the community who already hate you. And they're going to go off to some corner of social media and talk to each other, and no one else will be welcome. And that's kind of cool in a way because you've already lost them. But what you don't want is the person that's not already infected by that outrage in the community coming along and getting the answers to their questions from that group of people. You want them coming to you, which is why you at the very least need to be answering questions proactively on your website. A lot of people think they can just do this with their corporate website, but the truth is these days we don't go to a corporate website and read pages of information. What we want to do is go somewhere and talk to someone and get the answers. We've all got a little bit lazy. So you need to be there answering questions at least. And, I'm thinking here about what I've seen around the world, and I'm not picking on the US here because I know, a little bit less about it here, but the coal seam gas industry, the fracking industry. Now, some of these guys, they'd lost the argument before the argument started in some places, but what they allowed, certainly I've seen in the UK and in Australia, what they allowed for a long time, people who were interested in this to go off to social media to learn about it. And they didn't own the space. They stood aloof from it. They used various justifications, but they were wrong to do that. And it allowed outrage to amplify. It allowed the people who were curious to go to the people who were furious, and the two got together, and the curious became furious, and it just kept amplifying. Now, I'm not making any judgment on the issue. I have my own views about that, but I would say that in a situation like that, you at least need to own the space and be talking to people, just as a bare minimum.
While we wait for the next question, I have another one, and I'm kind of thinking aloud, so bear with me. I feel like this topic of using online tools and online engagement and the power of social media to provoke conversations and information sharing is something that, obviously ELGL takes really seriously and we really promote, and something that we really want to push out there. I also see it at like the ICMA level and the finance officers level. Are these conversations that are happening at the elected official professional training level as well? I mean, are elected officials getting the same type of messaging from experts like you about the power of these tools and how to best use them and how to best weigh the difference between outrage versus 10 angry people? Are you seeing that same interest that the staff side of local government is showing?
Yeah, look, that's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer for sure, because obviously I'm not the only person in this space, but I don't often talk to elected officials, largely because our relationships are usually with the bureaucracy, with the executive, and those are the people we form relationships with and want to help to provide really good, fulsome advice to the elected officials. But I do think it would be very powerful and very useful for elected officials to understand the power of online engagement and how it can be used to manage in these things. We do hear from elected officials from time to time who feel that it's their job to make these decisions and that the community really aren't needed in the process beyond the elections. And I think they're missing a point. We work with democracy, so this is about providing context so they can make better decisions. It's not about weighing votes or saying that, the only people here said this, so we've got to do this. It's about providing better context for those decision makers. So it'd be wonderful to have the opportunity to brief elected officials on a regular basis.
Because it strikes me that some of these messages to just the basic training about what constitutes outrage and how do you discern between outrage versus people who are very vocal. Even some of the messages that I think are pretty consistent, from a lot of different people, that hate is easier to muster up than love. I mean, I would just love for some of those concepts to not just be something that we think about at the staff level all the time, but rather something that an organization like yours can share more broadly. And so maybe, in the coming months, we can continue to work together on how we make sure that it's not just, those of us who tune into every engagement webinar, but instead, the bigger picture of who are the decision makers that are, sitting in those hearings and dealing with that outrage.
Yeah, look, we'd truly love to work with you on something like that. I think it'd be fantastic. I think our marketing team are listening in outside the door, so we should talk again. I think we're going to see each other in Detroit. Maybe we should have a beer and discuss that.
I think that's a plan, and I think if anyone else who's on this webinar is interested in exploring something like that with us, drop me an email or tweet at me, and we'll see what we can do. But it just strikes me that we talk a lot about this, and let's make that conversation even bigger, because the messages that you're sharing are important.
Great.
Well, before we wrap up, I want to just make sure there aren't any last questions out there. I know we're almost at the hour mark, and so I appreciate everyone for logging in. We will follow up with a video of this online, and then we'll have the tweet transcript, and I'll have Matt follow up with all of you that signed in today. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and if there aren't any other questions, I want to thank Matt for his time, and you can follow along on Twitter at ELGL Tech. And again, if you're going to be in Detroit in May, come and have a beer with us, and we'll talk more about engagement and how we spread the good word about managing online citizen engagement.
That'd be fantastic. Thanks so much, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much.